Hi, Maryam. Welcome to our Brown Brilliance podcast. It's wonderful to have you on here today, and I really look forward to speaking to you about everything that we've discussed. Do you want to just introduce yourself and tell us about what you do?
Yeah, so my name is Maryam. I always like to introduce myself first as a mom of three girls, which is such a beautiful blessing. And I'm also the founder of Black and Brown Parenting, which is a parenting organization that I work in as a parenting coach. I'm also a public speaker and I'm a speaker coach. A lot of people look at me like, what? Like that there's so much going on. But I promise you, I love to say this. I promise you I do not do it all. I mean, I've got a lot of roles, a lot of hats that I wear, but I don't like that label of super mum. So I always like to put it out there and say I definitely don't do it all.
Okay. Well, brilliant. Let's just jump into it. Let's get started. So, can you tell me a little bit about the inspiration behind Black and Brown parenting and what kind of, inspired you to start this?
Yeah, so Black and Brown Parenting really, to be honest, was started through my own struggles that I had as a parent. When I was in my, I would say probably the darkest times in my life where I was really struggling. I had two girls at the time and I was looking for support and I couldn't find support which was culturally informed. So I was finding all of this sort of amazing support, and theoretically it made sense to me. But when I was going to try and implement it in my life, there was something so huge missing. So the crux of Black and
Mm,
Brown parenting really came from the depth of my own struggles. But a little bit of background. So for myself, I hold a undergraduate degree in South Asian and African colonial history. When I finished that degree, I love that. I'm such a history nerd, by the way. I kind of entered the world of teaching because a lot of my family have a teaching background, and then I trained as a Montessori teacher, and that just really opened my eyes to a different way of raising children. And it was so polar opposite, perhaps, I guess, culturally to the way that I have
mm.
been raised. So much so that I thought, okay, there's something here. And then obviously, like I said, when I went through my struggles, I thought there's a gap here where the culturally informed kind of conscious parenting, there's no support available at all. And I don't want anyone to feel that the way that I did, searching for support and not being able to find anything. So that was one of the core reasons why Black and Brown parenting exists, to really provide that culturally informed conscious parenting support that is so needed. Because I think if you take culture out of it and all the nuances and everything that exists within it, it's really hard to implement it in your life. So yeah, that's a little bit of a background.
I totally resonate with that, being a parent of four, and obviously being as part of a Western society.
Mm.
A lot of parenting you do see, parenting advice, parenting books, everything does is kind of void of our culture to some degree. So you're not actually sure where that fits in, how that works in regards to conscious parenting or gentle parenting, let's say, which aspects of your culture kind of help that, promote that, and which sides of it almost hinder it and don't really allow you to raise your children the way you might want to,
Yeah.
considering positive parenting kind of ethoses and things along those lines. Do you think, in trying to merge modern conscious parenting with cultural values, did you come across many challenges, or did you find any problems in trying to do that?
Yeah, I think a lot of what I hear from our community, and when I say our community, I mean like the brown and the black community, is that this way of parenting doesn't align with our culture, and actually it's
Hmm.
a complete threat to our values, which couldn't be further from the truth. I mean, it's a long conversation in terms of,
Yeah.
the generational trauma that our ancestors experienced, given, when I say generational trauma, I just want to make it clear what I'm talking about in terms of things like enslavement, partition, all of those things that trickle down into our communities to
Mm.
create very dysfunctional behavior, which has now obviously trickled down into what our culture is. I have a very unpopular opinion. And I always say, it's really important for us to have the conversation of what we deem as our culture today, or what the norms are, just regarding parenting and the way that we discipline our children and the way that we raise them. Is that actually from our culture at all? Because if you look historically, there's little to no evidence that the way that we raise our children was through beating and shouting and screaming at them. Actually,
Yeah. Yeah.
if you go back home, wherever that is, whether it's the subcontinent, or whether that's in any countries in Africa or the Caribbean, it's really interesting how I find that a lot of what is taught in conscious or attachment parenting, a lot of the principles are inherently from our traditional cultures and values. So I think the number one I guess not a barrier, but the number one setback that I do hear from our communities is this is not our way, or this is the number one thing that I hear is, this is white people parenting, which it really
Mm-mm.
isn't. It really isn't, and I understand why you would think that. And I think, to be honest, if I'm very frank and honest, if you told me that Maryam, you would be parenting this way like 15 years ago, I probably would have laughed, because
I
given the
completely get
values
that.
that I
I
had
do
at
get
that
that.
time, so that I would say that was the number one kind of what I hear a lot from our communities. Not doom and gloom though. I mean, things are definitely changing. People are really
Mhm,
kind of
mhm.
open and receptive to just learning. So yeah.
That is a really interesting point that you made because I mean I can't even say that I have stopped to think about if you look at our parenting culturally,
Mm.
how much of it has come from trauma and is trauma based, and how much of it has come from what previous generations would have been like if those traumatic events hadn't occurred. Yeah,
Yeah.
so I have to say that's a really interesting way of looking at it, and I don't think many people stop to kind of look at that. Even the generations that promote that type of parenting.
Yeah.
So that is
I
definitely
I I
positive.
was I was going to say that, just off the back of what I said, it's the looking at the historical perspective, it really is about the fact that, and it doesn't, I like to say that it doesn't excuse the impact. So it doesn't
Yeah,
excuse
of
the
course. Yeah.
impact of, what we experienced growing up. But what it does is it allows a little bit of room for just humanizing your parents or your grandparents a little bit,
Hmm.
because given what they experienced, for them it was just about survival. For them, coming to Western countries, be it the UK, USA, Canada, wherever, just really focusing on having a roof over your head and having food on the table.
Of
Essentially,
course.
that was
Yeah.
their priority. And for us, obviously, we sit in a very privileged position to even think about personal development and what our parenting is like. So it's two things can coexist and be true at the same time, where we do stand on the sacrifices that they have made. That's so important. But at the same time, because we know better, we are obviously trying to do better.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, they obviously did the best that they could with what they had at the time. And it's almost like we have to kind of build on what they have
Yeah.
sacrificed for us, like you said. Yeah, that's definitely true. So what do you think are some of the unique challenges that Black and brown parents are facing in Western societies today?
Holding on to cultural identity in a way that serves us.
Yeah, yeah, I see that.
That is so, I think holding on to that in a way that serves us, and in a way that is healthy and is beautiful and is loving. I think that's the number one of the struggles. Secondly, I think it's also just kind of moving with the times in terms of the ways that we raise our children, knowing that you can still parent from a place of love, parent from a place of, guidance and teaching, instead of really sort of harsh discipline, without losing those elements of your culture. It is going back to what I said regarding it not being a threat at all to your culture,
Hmm. Hmm.
and that the fact that you can choose, the positive and the beautiful elements, which we all have within our cultures, and it's not
Yeah,
about completely disregarding it. I think also there is a huge generational gap, I find, within our communities. So we've got the elder generation and even us as parents, and times are moving so fast. I mean, for me, I remember when I was growing up, the world was completely different as opposed to how it is now. So I think even for myself, sometimes I look at my kids and I think that that generational gap still very much exists. So being able to, I guess, that's why I believe that conscious parenting is so important, because it allows you to create that partnership with your kids so much so that you can try to understand their world, as opposed to, be at war with them all the time. So I
yeah,
think off
yeah,
the
of
top of my
course.
head, those three things I would say are one of probably the biggest struggles that, for myself personally as well. And that
Yeah.
one that I see for us as Black and brown parents.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree with that. I suppose another thing, and I suppose this doesn't just affect parents in Western societies and brown and black parents, but one of the biggest problems in today's society for any parent really is social media and the influence that that has
Yeah.
on both boys and girls, but predominantly girls, in how it affects them and how they see themselves and their identity. And that's something I suppose previous generations didn't have to deal with, although they had to deal with elements of that, not
Yes.
as widespread as access that social media gives you, I suppose.
Yeah, I that is so incredibly important. I mean, I was just ranting the other day about how accessible TikTok is, and what you have access to is absolutely, even for myself as an adult, to navigate that space and come across things. And I have the brain to be able to, filter out what I believe to be true and
Yeah,
what
yeah,
I don't. And
exactly.
our
Yeah,
children don't have that
they
at
don't have
all.
that.
And what you just said actually reminded me of something that an auntie said to me. And I hope everybody that's listening, it feels a little bit validating to you, because I know it did to me. She said to me, do you know, growing up when we were raising our children, we didn't have to think about, where they are, who they're talking to, are they on their phones? What are they watching? They could just go outside and play. And really, we didn't really like, there was really no concern. Whereas this generation of mothers, the mental load is absolutely insane. Not only do you have to worry about, who they're talking to, where are they, what are they doing on their phones, all of that sort of stuff. You can't really go outside to play anymore without worrying so much.
Yeah.
There's just so much that they are, can be exposed to. But I think it comes back to, I mean, for me personally, I think, I'm, in terms of like, social media and phone access, I'm quite strict on that, to be fair, because I know the impact of that. So my girls, they don't have phones. They do have access to, like, tablets and stuff. Obviously we home educate, but it's very, very supervised, only because I believe that, when their minds are so young, there's things that they can be exposed to which they're just not ready to see. Or if they do see
Of
something, I
course.
say to
Yeah.
my girls all the time, if you come across something that is a bit confusing, or if you come across something that, you don't understand, come and talk to me about it.
Let's
We can have
talk
a
about it.
conversation about it. Let's talk about it. Let's, try and understand it. But I think you've hit a nail on the head, because I think, because I'm a mother of 3 girls, and just looking at the beauty standards, I mean, even for us as adults, I was saying to someone the other day, the filters that you use on Instagram and the filters that you use on these kind of apps change your features. So they
Actually
make your
change
nose
it. Yeah.
smaller, they make your skin color lighter.
Eurocentric. Yeah.
And
Exactly.
you just think, if you're not aware of these things, it can really impact how you feel about yourself, the
Of
color of
course.
your
Yeah.
skin, the texture of your hair, absolutely everything. So I think it's so important that this conversation is taking that narrative, because it's insane. And just imagine what it does to, not only just a girl, but obviously just children in general, their self-esteem, and how they feel about themselves.
This is the thing, we can't actually know that. Even the people that are creating these algorithms don't actually know the full effect of what will happen off the back of it. um so, like, for example, I mean, I'm glad you touched on home education. We've discussed this before. It's something that we have in common. And so I home educate my 4 kids as well. And things like social media and phones, we are very strict on that as well, in the sense that they don't have phones and they won't be accessing social media until they are at a developmental age in which they can handle and make decisions off the back of what they see. Because there's no age filter, there's no kind of filter of any kind. As far as it's concerned, everyone is the same age and has absolute access to everything, which can't be right at young ages like 11 and 10 and so on. I was reading a book recently, I'm not sure if you've heard of it, The Anxious Generation.
Yes, yes.
And there was some, absolute shocking information in there about how if a girl under the age of 13, or even at the age of 13, which is the age that Instagram and TikTok allow children to have
Mm,
accounts, even at the age of 13, after a few weeks, that child will start receiving or getting content. And they did this a few kind of studies and trials of having accounts with at that age kind of thing. And by about, it was about 10 weeks or something along those lines, maybe slightly more, the children started receiving posts and kind of content around losing weight, around what their
mm,
bodies should look like. And it's just, even if they hadn't shown any interest in that, even if their interest was nutrition, let's say, it would
yeah.
always lead into that kind of aspect, because it would be something that child at that age would be sensitive to,
Hmm.
and would want to see more of. And then it would affect their self-esteem to the point where, girls that were influenced by it were feeling suicidal. And that is something that, I mean, I know that's
Yeah.
an extreme side of looking at it, but it has the capability of doing that. So the kind of filtering of that and the access, the later we leave it and the more developed our child is before they have access to it, is just so important, really.
Yeah.
um
I mean,
Sorry, go.
yeah, I mean, I think what you've just shared there is as extreme as it sounds. I think it's the reality. And I think if you speak to a lot of young people, I mean, if you have younger, siblings or cousins or people in your family, it only takes, one or few conversations to realize how anxious the generation is in
It's
so
true.
many different ways. For me growing up, I mean, I wouldn't say that I didn't have, struggles with, perhaps like the way that I look or my skin color or, like my body image. Like, of course, that absolutely existed, but not to the degree that it exists now. And I think rightly so, like you're saying, it is because it starts so early on. And I think, there's only so much that obviously we can protect our children from. But I think this, for me personally, and again, maybe an unpopular opinion, there are certain things that we can control as parents, be it that we are having open conversations with them when they do come across things, or they are feeling a certain way, having that secure relationship. Or secondly, maybe even making the decision that, hey, actually, I don't really care what your friends are doing. I don't want you to have a phone, or I
Yeah.
don't want you to have this social media app. And I think that's so important, to exercise that kind of parental authority where necessary, because I guess as parents, it is our duty to obviously to keep them safe and protect them emotionally, physically, and I think that definitely falls under this umbrella.
Yeah. I think as home educators, we do have an advantage in that sense that they're not kind of, at school and the comparison element isn't there to such a large degree that everybody has a phone, but I don't have one.
Yes.
So there is an advantage to that point. But I suppose back to what we were talking about in terms of culture, and that's one of the difficulties that we have in Western societies these days. How would you approach conversations about identity, culture, race with your children, knowing that it's such a kind of difficult thing being of Black and brown heritage in a Western society?
Yeah. I mean, I think to answer this question from a personal perspective, because my children are they're literally black or brown. I should have said that in the beginning. They're literally black and brown. So for us, that conversation of heritage came very, very early on, because knowing that you're from two different cultures, I mean, interracial marriages are like, they're blowing up now, which I love to see. Like, it's amazing now. But a very long time ago, that didn't exist.
Yeah.
So for my children, I think they noticed straight away, mommy is slightly different color, and then dad is a slightly different color. So that conversation started very, very early on. So something that I practiced in my home and still continue to do so is, obviously, as home educators, when we even just simple things like looking at the resources that we buy within our home, I'm talking
Of
about,
course, yeah.
like dolls and books and characters and all those things. For me, it was just a non-negotiable to just make sure that everything represented them. I wanted them to kind of open up books and see themselves in those storybooks, because the
Of course,
reality
yeah.
is the world wouldn't reflect that. And for me,
Mm.
having that, self-esteem and that self-confidence in your skin color and who you are and your features, like you said about the Eurocentric stuff, it was so important to me. So that's just one of the ways that we kind of have conversations around cultural heritage, diversity. I mean, we've even had the conversation about racism. We've had to have it since, like the ages of 4 and 5. And I know that's really sad to think about, but unfortunately, we don't have the privilege of not having that conversation, not
Of
because
course,
they've
yeah.
had experiences, but because, the reality is that it does exist. And, there are microaggressions and all of that sort of stuff that goes on. But I think for me, what I love to instill within my kids, and I think my parents did this, and bless them for that, because I really appreciate it, is they really instill this kind of cultural pride, just being
Yes.
proud of like your roots and where you come from, and learning about the
Hmm.
history and the language and the food. I mean, like, I'm such a, like, I love all, I love that. But do you know what's so interesting? As I'm just talking to you, and I'm just thinking about this, I don't know if I felt that way growing up as a child, because I
Mm.
battled a lot with, the color of my skin, battled a lot with just like, my features. I battled a lot with that, because obviously within our cultures, we do have, there's colorism, for example. We have that, and that's so heavily ingrained within our
It is,
communities.
yeah.
And we don't realize that perhaps there's elements of ourselves when we become parents, and then we don't realize that perhaps we've kind of inherited some of those beliefs. And then
Mm.
when you catch yourself, you're like, uh-oh, I don't want to think like this, because you
No,
have
I
your
don't.
own
Yeah, exactly.
children. And then you kind of really have to do the work to investigate, why do I think like this? And it's a lot of
Hmm.
unlearning, isn't it?
A
But
lot of
yeah,
it, yeah.
cultural heritage is something that I'm so big on.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I mean, and those ways of kind of talking about it with your children, making it an open conversation and something that's on the table all the time. And like you said, the cultural pride that behind it, that has to be one of the biggest things. And when you can see that light up in your children's eyes, that is
Yeah.
a beautiful thing to see. But I mean, this is one of the things behind Darcy, our skincare brand here, is that I don't want children of future generations to feel the way that we felt
Mm.
necessarily in a Western society, that hang on a second, I look different here, nothing out here looks like me. And although I don't vividly remember this, it must be such an alienating feeling, really. And it's not something I would want my daughter or my sons, for that matter,
Yes.
to feel. So, we need to normalize brown beauty, normalize brown women being at the front of things, brown women having the ability to do what every other woman is doing. And it's not a taboo or it's not strange. It's actually the norm. So the more that, we can do, as you're doing as well, to push that through, the more comfortable future generations will feel about their culture. They will feel about their race and
Yes.
identity. I suppose it all works in that direction. I suppose the next question I have for you is, what role do you think community plays in kind of, families of color, sorry, in their culture and race? And how do you feel like the community that you've managed to build fosters that?
Anytime I think about community, I think it always
Hmm.
just brings me back to the way that I grew up. So
Yeah.
communally, in terms of like, I don't know about you, even probably for yourself as well, just growing up with, grandparents, aunties, uncles, cousins, family, friends. That's the way that I grew up.
It is.
And I
Yeah.
realized that, it's not rose tinted, don't get me wrong. Obviously, that does come with other pressures as well. But looking back, I think it was such a beautiful way to be raised,
Hmm.
because I want that for my children as well. And I try to emulate that in terms of, making sure that, family ties are really important and that we're building those sort of beautiful relationships with friends, with family friends, because I think, that in this day and age, the way that we kind of parent is very alien. It's very alien in the sense that we're just expected to wear the hats of 20 people and, be the
Yeah.
grandparent and be the auntie and be the uncle. And it's no wonder so many of us as mothers are absolutely burnt out, because we're trying to do it all. And it's not normal. And I think
It's not.
culturally, we've always communally parented. Like it's just
Hmm.
a given thing in Black and brown cultures, isn't it? So
Yeah.
number one thing that I try and do is be open to asking and receiving help, and be open to kind of building those relationships where I can build that community, not just only for my kids, but also for myself. Because I truly
Hmm.
believe that it takes a village to raise a mother, as much as it takes a village to raise a child at the same time. So for me, with Black and brown parenting, building that community where we can just openly have those safe spaces, share the things that we're struggling with, share the wins, because we can all relate to each other, because our
Yeah.
cultures are so similar, where we'll be like, oh, my mom said this, or my in-law said this, or this happened, this auntie said this. And I think what just happens is it just, number one, it just normalizes that, and you feel like I'm not alone, because there's so many of us
Yes.
out there who think I'm the only one experiencing this, I'm the only one experiencing this pressure, or like my family member said that you're just spoiling the kids because you're deciding to parent this way. It's such a common thing, isn't it? And
Yeah,
you
it
feel
really
like
is.
you're the only one going through that. And I think when you just have a listening ear, you have someone who gets it, they get it, they understand your values, they get it because they're experiencing it as well, they've experienced it as well. Number one, it just creates that, it's the validation, isn't it? And we talk about
It is,
validating
yeah.
our kids, but we need that validation as well. And I think once you are validated, then you can do something about it, as opposed to feeling like you're all alone. So community, I think it's so important. I remember that when I was early in my motherhood journey, I really struggled with that aspect of community, because I didn't know how to find it. There's always that I think it's a meme on social media where it's like, where is this village? Like, is it gonna like
Yeah,
fall down
yeah.
from the sky
I have to
somewhere?
say I've wondered that many times myself.
And I think, it's the uncomfortable conversation is that sometimes you've got to go and build it, which means you've got to
Yes.
just take off this mask that you're wearing, which we all do as mums. I did it all the time, where you're pretending you're fine, you're pretending everything is okay, but in reality, deep down, you're really struggling. But maybe you're
Yeah.
worried about judgment, maybe you're worried about what she will think about you. But from my experience, what I found is, with the community that I built, is when one mother just says, takes off her mask and she says, I'm struggling. Like, I'm struggling with this. I've had a really bad day with the kids. And, it's all too much. You'll find like 20, 30 other mothers will say, you know what, me too. And sometimes that's it. Sometimes you don't even want a long answer or a solution. You just want someone to see you. And I think that's what
Mm.
community does. It allows you to be seen for who you are.
Yeah, that's really well put. I can say there's numerous occasions where I've felt those feelings.
Mm.
And I suppose you do sometimes have to just get up and create that community for yourself. And it does, as you said, when you take your mask off, it allows the parents around you to do the same.
Yeah.
And the relief and the support is so important in that aspect. It is really, really important. Okay, so the next question that I wanted to ask you is, how do you think that we kind of need to adapt parenting styles to help children of color navigate beauty standards, that exist today, as well as cultural expectations, which are kind of so different to what they see on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I mean, to answer the beauty standards one, I always take it back to, and with me, people who know me, when you never give like a surface level answer, and I'm like, no, because if you want fundamental change, it's not going to come from the surface level. But for me,
Very
I
true,
think
yeah.
what I found is, from a professional and a personal perspective, is that when it comes to beauty standards, it's really about accepting yourself first. Honestly, I think that's what I've seen. It's about accepting yourself first, accepting your skin color, accepting the texture of your hair, accepting the way that you look, because that changes how you show up as a mum. It changes how you show up as a parent. And children see that. If you have an insecurity within yourself, children see that. And even more so, even, I share this with permission. I've had clients where, their children are born, and because they're still holding to elements of colorism, and because they might be darker skinned, and then they have children who are darker skinned, they worry about the experience that they will have, because they know what they experienced growing up from the community, from aunties or comments, or how they just felt about themselves and
Yeah.
the color of their skin. So I think my simple answer would truly just be, learn to accept yourself, understand what are your insecurities, where do they come from. I mean, who taught you to hate you? It just reminds me of Malcolm X's quote here. Who taught you to hate the color of your skin or the shape of your nose, or where did you learn
Yep.
that from?
So
Because you can
important.
unlearn that. It's not too late. You can go on that journey of unlearning it and truly accepting yourself. So when your kids see you accepting yourself, I would like to hope that naturally they would have they would have that, what word am I looking for? They would have that kind of one step up, where they don't have those insecurities from the beginning. I mean, sure, society will probably feed them into it, but you'd like to
Mm.
hope that you would be there to be able to help them, because you're so accepting of yourself, to really navigate that space. So yeah, I mean, yeah, accept yourself, and not just physically, but also internally as well.
Again, I completely agree with you. Being a skincare brand, we have so many messages from, women and parents sometimes saying that they're kind of ashamed to admit it, but they fear
Mm,
letting their children go play out in the sun because of what somebody might say about the color of their child's skin, or the way that child might be treated, because they have memories of how they were treated
yeah.
because of their skin color. And, whether we like it or not, children do feed on that. Even if we don't actually verbalize what we are feeling, they can feel it and they can see it, and they kind of take that on as something, like you said, that they will build on. So if they're
Hmm.
feeling the confidence that you feel, and they're feeling the beauty that you feel because you
Yes,
have fully accepted yourself, they will know that that is beautiful, and they will know to carry that with them, whether they are fed,
absolutely.
whatever else from society. They will come at it from a different angle than, let's say, our generation did.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So how do you feel that parenting practices kind of need to change to encourage self-love in children, and pride, like we spoke about before? How do we make them feel that pride for their culture and accept their race, rather than not feeling, I want to say second class, but I suppose feeling like they're not the most important, or they are not the best, let's say? How do you stop them from having those feelings?
I would say representation is so important.
Yeah.
Representation, not just representation in books and resources and things, but just representation in real life as well. Like who you kind of intentionally build your community with as well, I think is really, really important. The conversations that you're having at home. I mean, I remember just growing up, and even with the kids that do it now, my grandparents told me so many stories, and we pass on those stories as, oral traditions.
Yep.
Things
Yep.
like language. Like I remember, oh my goodness, my mom, she forced me, right? I remember, and I hated it at the time, but I love her for it now. Is after school every single day for 2 hours, we went to the mosque. So
Hmm.
we had to learn Quran, but then we had to also learn Urdu, right? So we learned how to read, write, and and all of that. And I hated it so much, but now I thank her for it, because I still have that skill, and that's something that I'm
Yep.
so passionate about. And also my girls are learning my husband's language, and obviously my language. So I think language is so important, surrounding them with who they are surrounded with, family holidays, cultural holidays, all of those sort of things are so incredibly important. I think also for this generation, what I think is important as well is kind of building that generational gap. for spending time with grandparents, with aunties, with
Yeah.
uncles, all of that. Because it's not just on you as a parent to teach them those or to instill that cultural pride. Sometimes I feel like as parents, we think it's just all on us, but it's not. And it goes back to what we said about community, that parenting it's done in a village. So it means sometimes your auntie or, a grandparent will teach them things about culture that perhaps you don't know about, or perhaps you don't have the time about. Let's be real, right? So it's in, I guess it's in all of that. But to answer the second part of the question, where it's how do we kind of change our parenting practices where we're parenting from a place of love, I think for me, I would say it's, having that kind of putting the relationship first. No matter what happens, putting the relationship with your child first. So open communication, trying to understand them instead of feeling like it's you against them. I mean, I remember
Yeah.
growing up, I really felt that element of my parent is up here and I'm all the way down here. There was no kind of like collaborative
Yeah.
approach of let's problem solve together or let's talk about this instead of shouting and screaming at each other.
Hmm.
I am your parent, and obviously I am here to teach you and guide you, but I can also learn from you. I mean, I've learned a heck of a lot from my girls. I
Of
don't
course, yeah,
know
we can be
about you.
wrong. Of course, yeah.
And we can be wrong, and we can apologize and we can do all of that stuff.
Yeah,
So I think
of course.
going forward, that is, in my eyes, I think going forward, that's the number one element, is just putting that relationship first and keeping that open communication with them and creating that collaborative relationship.
So, just off the back of that, what kind of cultural practices do you kind of engage in regularly, make your children feel a sense of belonging?
Okay, so I would say family being one of them.
Yeah.
And then obviously, given like the religious festivals that we celebrate or the cultural festivals that we celebrate, those are ones. Language, and obviously because they have two different languages, that's a cultural practice that we very much practice. Even in the clothes that you wear, like the clothes that you wear and the stories that you tell. I mean, for us as home educators, we have so many resources on just the history. The
Yeah.
history of our countries, and me being a history nerd, like I go on about it all the time, right? But just the history, and if you're blessed enough to be able to take your children to wherever your roots are from, I mean, absolutely do that. I mean, that within itself is just we're planning on doing that as well, by the way. I'm really looking forward to, but that within itself is just not a beautiful experience. There's so much learning within that,
There is
and
so
it
much,
helps
yeah.
them to connect to I think sometimes it can feel like where you're from, but there just feels like this disconnect because you're living in this Western country, and it's like you understand it, but being able to kind of, I guess, given the practices, some of the examples that I've just given, being able to encourage these practices helps them to connect a little bit more and make sense of who they are and their identity, so they can go into the world just being sure of themselves, because the reality is that majority of the world doesn't represent them. So if from home they come with a solid foundation where they are represented, where they are sure of themselves, and they're surrounded by all these beautiful cultural things, then surely I would like to hope they go out into the world being just firm in their identity and who they are.
Yeah, again, that's beautifully said. And I agree with all of that. We actually did that this year. We took our eldest two children to India,
Oh,
kind of as
lovely.
a not a coming of age type of thing, but
Yeah.
maybe as well,
Yeah.
where they got to explore everything, understood who we are, where we come from,
I love that.
and everything that we talk about. What is it? Where have those stories come from? Where have these? We talk about our gurus and what we believe, and
Yeah.
this is the base of it. This is where it all started and where it all began.
Yeah.
And it's so important for a developmental kind of growth, especially when they get to the age of puberty and kind of
Yes.
growing forward. The stuff that they believe and is instilled in them at that stage, at that age, is who they will become essentially, because it's when their kind of neurons are being set in stone,
Yeah.
not in stone, but that's the firm ideas and views and opinions that they will bounce off of for the rest of their life, pretty much. I mean, it's not to say that you can't learn and you can't grow as you grow further,
Yes.
but
Yeah.
it's a very key stage in life that kind of really denotes who you will be as an adult, really. So
Absolutely.
the one thing that I really wanted to talk to you about this whole conversation, I've kind of been biting my tongue before we got to this point, but as a fellow home educator, something that's a real passion of mine, I would love to hear your experience about it, what inspired you to home educate, and what the journey's been like for you and your family.
Oh, it's been a wild, beautiful journey. That's how I describe it. It's wild and
Wild is the
beautiful.
word, yeah.
I mean, what inspired my home education journey? Do you know what it is? I have my mom, she's a teacher, like almost all of my family have a teaching background. And then when I went into kind of training as a Montessori teacher, I mean, I love the Montessori approach, don't get me wrong.
Yeah,
But for me, I think I had this belief that, God has given me these precious little human beings, and I just want to do right by them, do right by them and give them the best environment that I can, and help them to learn and flourish in the way where they actually enjoy it, where they actually, where I can actually give them a stimulating environment that works for them. So I have a lot of knowledge, obviously, of the school system. I think the UK education school system is absolutely rubbish, if I use the polite word. I've got so much love for teachers. It's not on the teachers. It's
it's
just
not
the
that.
way
No,
the
it's not.
system is set up. It's not them. It's
Hmm.
institutional. And obviously, I had the privilege of making the decision that, hey, actually, the girls are not going to go to school. So they've never been to school. I've not put them in at all. And it's been, like I said, it's been a wild and beautiful journey, but I've learned so much. I've learned so much. And I went through my own journey. You probably be able to relate to this, where I have had to deschool myself because,
Completely.
given the fact that we've been through the school system, and obviously as brown and black people, we're very, education was very kind of like, do your education, do your learning, do your tuition, do this, do that, right? I remember my parents for the first time, and my mom still asked, bless her, she still asked me till this day. She goes, Maria, are they really not are they not going to do their GCSEs? Like, she still asks me that question. And I'm like, Mom, it's been how 13, 14 years now, and you're still asking me that question. But I love it. I mean, I love it. Like, I get to be at home with them. I get to, go out and do all these cool things with them. I get to, it helps with building that solid relationship. It means, during their formative years, I get to be there. And whilst it's wild, like I said, it's so special because I get to kind of shape their environment. I get to kind of build that relationship with them. They get to learn what they want. I mean,
That's the key, isn't it?
they
Yeah.
follow their interests. We do loosely follow the national curriculum, but honestly, the way that I've seen my girls flourish in just enjoying learning, I never enjoyed learning. I'll be completely
Not
honest.
like that. No, it's
I
true.
not in that way where they just had that. So people always say to me, like, your girls, my mom has said this to me. She said, Mariam, when you were growing up, we had to force you to do your homework. We had to force you to, go to tuition and do all of these things. But something that she noticed in my girls is they want to do it themselves. And I think home education really allowed that for them because it built that intrinsic motivation because they were so interested in what they were learning. They had that space where they could kind of just, Mummy, we want to do these particular topics. I'm like, yeah, let's do it, right? Let's do it. And I think that's what home education does. It really gives that kind of space to enjoy learning. I know it sounds so simple, but unfortunately what I have seen from my personal experience, and just, from off the back of speaking to a lot of friends and stuff, children don't have that element of actually enjoying learning and being able to learn at their own pace and being able to have that freedom. I think if I could sum up home education in one word, it's freedom. That's what I would say.
I would have to say that's the word that inspired us as well. It's just freedom. I couldn't imagine having children and, like you said, precious souls, that have been gifted to us, and then sending them to go and sit with a complete stranger for most of their life, childhood, and in a classroom in four
Mm,
walls, and that's your childhood there. I just couldn't do that. It just felt like it was wrong, very wrong to me intrinsically. And when you think about the alternative, that look, actually your classroom is the whole world. You
yes.
can, you can choose anywhere, we can go anywhere, we can learn anything, and you have the freedom to learn anything you want to learn. And I know that you said it sounds very simple,
Mm,
the freedom to learn and to enjoy learning, but that is such an alien concept in schools, in colleges, in universities. It's something that you feel like you have to do
mm,
because everybody's doing it, and it's a societal norm basically.
mhm,
And if you don't
mhm,
do it, obviously you're going against the grain,
mhm.
and so it can't be right potentially. And that's the thing again. We had the same comments as well. Like, my mother-in-law was like, I can't sleep at night because the kids aren't being educated.
Bless her.
I know, and it was like, oh, it's really not the case. But what happens is, I mean, this was, we decided to home educate before the kids were even born. We just
Wow.
thought, this is
Yeah.
how we want to do it. I mean, I remember my journey at school and university and everything, and it wasn't negative, it was perfectly
Mhm.
fine. But I do vividly remember thinking, I would never do this to my children.
It's
Quite
amazing.
often, yeah,
Yeah.
because although I was happy learning and doing all these things, it wasn't what I wanted to learn at the time
Yes.
that I wanted to learn it. And very often I would really be thinking, I would like to go home now. And it was just never an option.
Mm. Mm.
So to have that, so I mean, some days my children will be, away learning whatever they want to learn, so deep in focus, and other days they won't want to. And it's totally fine because they have that flexibility, and they're kind of steaming through so much stuff, and you'd think that they would just sit at home watching TV. And we've actually, we've had those comments as well where people have said, oh right, so they leave the house. Of course they do. They're probably more out than they are in. But there are so many negative connotations around that whole thing. But yeah, the freedom to learn is just is and just freedom generally. That is exactly the word I would use to describe it. It's just such a beautiful thing. And I don't actually know about. I can't think of any hindrances that they would have being home educated than they would be at school. And obviously here the normal one. I mean, how do they
Socialization.
socialize? Yeah, that's the number one question all the time. I can also almost ask it myself before someone's even said it. But school isn't socializing. That's not what it is. It's not what it's
No, it's
for.
not.
So,
It's forced. What was the word? What I say something? It's forced peer. It's like, where in life do you sit in a room with children of the same age as yourself, and you're kind
or
of
even
forced
adults
to.
for that matter. Ever.
We don't do that. It's not
No,
real
no.
life, right? It
Exactly,
really
no.
isn't real life. But yeah, freedom. Honestly, like, can I just say, like, to anyone that's listening and doesn't home educate, I have so much respect and love for the moms that do the school run. Like, I
Of
could
course.
not get up and do that. Honestly, it's yeah, freedom to kind of just exist and be in who you are and what you want to learn. And yeah, I couldn't imagine life another way. And I truly say that home education is a lifestyle. It just
It
becomes
is, for
part and
sure.
parcel of
It
your
is.
life. It's not something that you switch on in the morning. It's just part of your lifestyle.
And you grow so much emotionally
Yes.
as a
Yeah.
parent.
Yeah.
Because I found one of the biggest things is not actually teaching them, not actually finding resources for them. It's actually just sitting with them and their emotions when they need to be sat with until they're feeling emotionally well. When they get to that point, everything else is just seamless and they will do that by themselves, basically.
Yeah.
Completely
And I think
child-led
it's that
journey.
it's that privilege of, I guess, being able to do that because you're there with them.
Of course,
And
yeah.
I would say, home education, it kind of it's helped me grow so much as a person because I've learned so much about myself because I've seen
Of
things in
course.
my kids that perhaps I didn't like when actually it was nothing to do with them. It was everything to do with me. And then I had to
Yeah,
work
yeah,
on it,
definitely true.
and
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
not easy. And that's the wild
No,
part.
it's not. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, there's so many almost unnatural expectations that we have of children.
Yes.
And it's only when you are with them all of the time that you notice these little nuances and these little changes and you think, kind of what have I done to
Mm,
for that to be happening? Or what can I do to improve that or help them in that scenario? And then it
mm.
does cause self-reflection and then you realize, okay, hang on, I see where this is coming from. And it's a whole whole different journey in that sense. But yeah. So just moving on swiftly, because I could honestly talk about education all day, and I think that's a
Yeah.
different conversation, different podcast sometime maybe. But yeah, so I mean, we've touched on cultural identity and heritage, um, but as a home educator, what do you include in your home education to promote those things that they wouldn't necessarily get at school, let's say?
So like I kept saying throughout this entire podcast, I am a
Yeah,
complete history nerd. So they have already learned about, what I find really interesting is when you look at like South Asian or African history, especially African history, it always starts with slavery. And that's all you ever learn at school. And
yeah,
that's my pet peeve. It really irritates me because African history did not start with slavery. It did not.
no, so much
There
deeper.
was kingdoms, riches, there was so much. So they know about that already.
Yeah,
They've learned about the empires, they've learned about the kingdoms. And even when it comes to South Asia, prior to colonization, they have learned about that already. So part of that is obviously instilling cultural pride, but also knowing the fact that, what they perhaps just learned surface level at school, they've already learned that at home already.
yeah,
Secondly, I think I did touch on the resources and the importance of the representation in terms of the books and other sort of resource that they have. I mean, even I'm so big on it. Like even exercise books, I'm like, if I can find an exercise book with like a brown or a black character, I am so buying that, right? Just
so
because
true. It is.
it's
Yeah,
so simple, but it's like
yeah.
you don't realize the impact that it has
That
on
is so
children.
true. Yeah, yeah,
Just being able to have something as simple as that and saying that is me, or that even my 4-year-old, so my youngest is 4 and I've got the 2 older girls, and even her, it's like she will open books and point, oh, that looks like me, that looks like daddy, that looks like mommy. Something as simple as being able to see their world represented in a book is just the impact of that is just absolutely insane. um So that's what I would say. And then also I like given, home education, we do leave the house, right? So,
Yeah.
obviously like the trips that we go on, I mean, we go to like museums and stuff, and we go to like with groups, and even just culturally, again, I'm coming back to history, but just even like museums which show like the history of the countries and stuff like that. We do all of that. For me, what I really make time for in our home education journey is definitely family. I mean, that's really
Yes.
important for me, because I feel like that within itself shapes who they are and their identity culturally as well. Yeah, I think that's what I would say, just off the back of how we kind of really implement that culture. I mean, they're learning languages as well, part and parcel of their home education journey. They're learning languages. My girls love how to cook. Oh my gosh, they love cooking. Growing up, for
Yeah.
me, I hated it, because my mum used to always say to me, what's your husband gonna eat? And I remember my response was always like, he's got hands, mum, like he can cook, right? But my girls, like, they love to cook, literally, bless them. And they love to cook because it's a life skill, and they see their dad in the kitchen and stuff. So it's a culmination of so many different things that kind of, I guess, add up and help. What I'd like to hope, that it helps children to really form their identity and have that solid foundation, so that they can go out into the world and just feel, that simple feeling of like, I belong
Contentment.
somewhere.
Yeah, I
I know who
belong.
I
Yeah.
am. I'm sure in my identity. Like, imagine going into the world like that. How awesome. Like, that's just amazing.
Yeah, even the question itself that I posed, I suppose, doesn't really take into account that home education, like you said, is a lifestyle, and
Yeah.
you are living your lifestyle, which is
Yep.
your culture, which is your identity. So, of course, by default, they will be having that at the forefront of everything that they are doing, I suppose. And it's interesting that you said that even when you look at, you know, your background, South Asian or African, or, whichever way you're looking at it, you don't start off with what you normally see in schools is the slavery, the partition, all these things. There's times before that when there was
Yes.
huge amounts of power, there was huge amounts of riches, like you said, and it's tapping into that and not just kind of leaving them potentially with kind of a victim mindset, a victim
Yes.
mentality.
Yes.
That we've been through this, and because of this we have to be reactive. We don't have to,
Mm.
because there's all this stuff behind that, and really those are the things that we should be maybe focusing on more. So
I
I
love
suppose
I love that you said that. I love that, because I feel like for me growing up, my grandparents were very, very big on that. I mean, yes, they did tell stories of like partition and all of that sort of stuff,
yeah.
but they were very big on, my granddad, he was actually born in Amritsar. So before
Right,
and then
right.
obviously he had to leave. And I remember he told us stories of, they were landowners and they had so much money. And obviously when the partition came, they literally had to dig a hole and just dash everything inside,
Yeah,
and then
my
just
goodness.
leave.
Leave, yeah.
And I remember just sort of really hearing those stories. But then he also told the stories of, what his life was like before, and how much money his dad had, and, how like they lived in these huge, like massive mansions, and just what life was like prior to colonization, and how everybody just lived amicably regardless of
Together,
religion.
exactly.
We were
That there
all
was, yeah,
together,
exactly it.
and it just, even now, it's giving me goosebumps talking about this, because these are
Same.
things that are not taught in
They're
schools.
not, they're
And if
not.
our children know this, then I mean, I gosh, I just get really emotional. I can't imagine how that would feel, knowing, going into the world knowing so much about your past, not just the, the I was going to say violent, but not just the kind of the partition, like you said, not just the enslavement, but the
Yeah.
fact that you came from riches, you came from such knowledge and wealth and, education, because our people were educated, don't get
Of
me
course, this
wrong.
is where the focus needs to be.
Exactly.
The focus needs to
Yeah.
be the things they can learn and grow from, not from dwelling on the maybe negative aspects of the things, and not to say they don't need to be mentioned,
Yes.
not to say they don't need to be understood and learnt from, but they don't need to be dwelled on. And what I find in schools at times is they are actually the only thing that's taught, not as holistically, if you know what I mean. And
Because
it's
I
funny that
think,
you mentioned. Sorry, go on.
sorry,
No, you
sorry.
go.
I think going back to the education system, it's Eurocentric, isn't it? So everything
Of
you learn
course.
is pretty Eurocentric. And also I'm going to go as far as saying it's from the lens of the colonizer. I mean, let's be real, right?
No,
That's
it's
where
true.
it's
Yeah,
from. So
that's
that's the
very
kind of
real.
history that you learn.
Yeah,
And that's fine, right? And it's not to say that people who send their children to school, you can still teach your kids these other things at home,
of course.
on the
Yeah,
weekends, in the evenings. And, if you don't want to do it, get a family member to do it, get the grandparents to tell them oral stories, whatever way. It doesn't have to be something sit down. It can just be a conversation. You can
of
watch a
course. Yeah.
documentary, you can watch a film. There's so many ways about going about it. So whether your children go to school or they don't, you can still give them this access to this element of history and, cultural pride, which is, I think it's so important.
Yeah. That's a very good point. We are kind of going down this route of home ed because we have that in common, but
Yes.
there is the element of how to introduce this to any child, not just children that are home educated, I suppose. I just wanted to touch slightly on you talking about your granddad moving in when the partition happened. It kind of really touches a nerve in the sense that my grandma had to do the same thing, but the other way around. So she's
Yes.
in Pakistan and she tells us a story where she had to grab whatever she could in her hands, and that was it. And they had to literally run
Mm.
for their lives, and that was the state that they were living in at that time. But before that, like you were saying, there was a state of peace and everyone coexisted, and there wasn't this you and us and this
Yeah.
massive divide, which was then brought in by the colonization and everything. So I think even things like that are really important to talk about, in terms of integration and the kids,
Yes.
the way they see others and the way they perceive things as well, not just how they themselves perceive each other, let's say. So it's important topics like that to touch on, that they can easily be missed out on if you just go with what is generally taught, I suppose. So it's important to look outside of that and teach everything in a holistic way, I'd say.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So after talking about home ed, I'd ask you, what is the most rewarding part for you? What do you kind of, at the end of the day, think, yeah, this is why I home educate?
You get to have fun. I know it sounds so simple, but you get to have
Yeah,
fun. Like, I love it, honestly. Like, sometimes I'm more engrossed in the projects and things that they're doing than they are. And they're like, Mom, this is our work. Like, you get to have fun. And I think for me, again, I think it goes back to that word of freedom and flexibility to live life on your terms. Simply,
yes, yeah.
that's it. That's the most rewarding part of home education. That's it.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on that. So what would you say is the most challenging?
Being with your kids all the time. I'm real. I am real. Being with your kids all the time, it's not easy. It's not easy. And sometimes I say things to my mom about it, and then she's like, "But you made this decision. You
Yeah.
chose to do that." And I'm like, "Yeah, but just because you do something and it feels hard doesn't mean it's the wrong decision, right? Because
Yeah,
everything has its kind of like, fluctuations." I would say, and the way that I guess I battle that is obviously making sure that I take out time for myself, making sure, even if it's just like in the evenings or on the weekends, I've learned how to prioritize myself, because a burnt out homeschooling mom is no good to anyone, of course. So I think that's what I would say. That's the most challenging part, is it is being with them. I mean, as the girls have kind of grown older, I am able to kind of, drop them off to like a 1-2 hour lesson class or club or something. And then I
yeah,
get, a bit of a breather sort of downtime for myself. But being with them 24/7 has its pros, but also, honestly speaking, it does have its challenges. And I guess we pick and choose our battles, don't we? But yeah, that
yeah.
would probably be, for me personally, one of the struggles, because it's a wild journey being with them all the time.
Yeah, no, that has to be it. I mean, for most home ed parents, that has to be it. I mean, like, on one hand, you'll have my eldest will be asking me a maths equation that's completely over my head, right? And then I've got my 2-year-old telling me about this little bug that he's found. So it's like you're like so pulled in so many different directions, and it's just like, oh my goodness, right? Just give
Do you
me a
know, that's
second.
really funny, because one of my older girls, she asked me maths problems. And I hate maths. I cannot, numbers just like, whoa, fly over my head, right? Ask me anything else, I can do that. And she literally says to me, she goes, Mom, what did you even learn at school? Like, why can't
Exactly,
you
it's a good
do
question.
this year? It's like a year 6 maths problem. Like, I don't know. She goes, what did you learn at school? Were you paying attention? And I was just like, go and ask your dad, because he's the maths dude. I don't have a clue. I don't know. But it's so funny, because that always happens to me. I'm like, I don't know the answer.
Yeah, it's the same setup. But I think with my eldest, what I found is he has just kind of flown at the level
Bless
that
him.
which he is kind of coding and doing maths. It's like, me and my husband are like, all right, that's not even, what we learnt at GCSE and A level. So I'm
Bless
not quite
him.
sure. Let's do this and let's do this to work it out. But yeah, it does definitely get intense when you've got all four of them or all three of them
Mhm.
asking
Mm.
different things at different times about completely different topics.
Yes.
And you're the source of information in that sense. So yeah, it does get a bit difficult like that. So what other things do you do to kind of, self-care, to take care of yourself? Because, all those hats that you mentioned at the beginning of the
Yeah.
conversation, they're a lot, right? So how do you kind of stay sane and kind of take care of yourself and all of that?
I think I have learned how to prioritize myself. I learned the hard way. I'm very transparent in the sense that I learned the hard way. You know, I was that kind of doting homeschooling mom who wanted to be everything and do everything. I definitely did all of that, right? And I burnt myself out down to the ground. I thought, okay, this is not working. So for me, what I try and do is on the weekends, I will always try and, you know, even if it's just like a couple of hours to myself, and bless my husband, he's like my number one support. So I always try and do that. I mean, just last week, I went to go and visit my sister, my baby sister, and I said, look, you're taking care of me for a few days because I'm so tired, right?
That's
Bless her.
nice.
So she looked after me for a few days. And I think I have the privilege in the sense that my husband works from home. So we kind of
Yeah.
always have like an extra pair of hands. Like, you know, COVID had a little bit of a positive where working from home became a thing. So I
Yeah.
kind of have an extra pair of hands sometimes, not all the time. So that always helps as well. But in the evening, you know, for me, and I think a lot of people are surprised about this, but one thing, given the fact that we practice conscious parenting, one thing that I'm super strict on is bedtimes. You know,
Yeah.
you can stay in your room, it's fine, you can read your book, you can do what you want, but you know, unless there's an emergency, please don't leave your room, or unless you need to go to the toilet, because I need that downtime for myself so that I can connect with myself and even with my husband as well, you know,
Yeah,
because
of
the kids are
course.
always there. So that's
Yeah.
something that I kind of learned um through a very sort of deep struggle. I'm very big on, you know, I love going out with my friends. So I'm known to send, you know, very long voice messages or like phone calls, or I always schedule time for my friends. Like I am just, I love that. I love going out to eat, go to the cinema, like watching films. Like, do you know what it is? It's, I think I learned all of this because I knew that, you know, being, like I said, being that burnt out kind of homeschooling mum, given the roles that I do, it wasn't going to serve me. You know, I couldn't do the
Mm.
work that I do at Black and Brown Parenting, couldn't go and speak at these events and do all of these things if I wasn't prioritizing myself. And for me, especially because I've got girls, I think regardless if you've got boys or girls, I knew that, you know, they say that obviously children are watching how to be a person or an adult just from the way that you live your life. And I
Mm-hmm.
thought I wouldn't want
Exactly.
them to accept anything that I'm accepting currently. So I've got to change things because I don't want to think that's normal for them. So
Of
when they
course. Yeah.
become, you know, if they choose to become mothers or whenever they get married or whatever, then I want them to know that at least I've tried my best to, you know, live my life authentically as possible, and obviously leave them with a blueprint which is healthy. Because I think for a lot of us, we didn't, bless our mothers, we didn't have that. You know, it was very
No, you
much
never saw that.
self-sacrifice. And I didn't want to do that to myself, and I didn't want to leave them with that as well. So yeah, I guess I learned the hard way that, girl, you better prioritize yourself because it's
Yeah.
important.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely true. Couldn't agree more with that. So what is one piece of advice that you would give parents of color trying to balance kind of cultural heritage with modern parenting?
I think for me, I would say give yourself permission to question. So give
Yeah.
yourself permission to question the things that were normalized for you growing up. So be it within, you know, what you view as discipline, for example, or what you view in terms of, you know, how you're raising the children. Is it with harshness? Is it with love? Where did you get this idea or this belief from that it needs to be this way? Secondly, I know we spoke a lot about, you know, colorism and beauty standards. Also give yourself permission to question those things, because
Hmm.
sometimes you will find yourself thinking a certain way or believing that it needs to be a certain way. Well, actually, that's not your belief. And it's something that's just been inherited or something that you've internalized growing up. So question, give yourself permission to question. And within you questioning, it's not you disregarding your culture. You're not disrespecting your elders. You're not saying, I know it all. You're not doing any of that. But simply what you're doing is you are picking the beautiful parts of your cultural heritage and your identity, and you're taking that forward, not only for yourself, but also for the next generation. And then you're leaving the unhealthy or toxic elements that aren't serving you. They didn't serve the previous generation, nor is it serving yourself, nor will it serve the next generation. And you're saying, okay, you know what, we can leave these behind now because we're no longer in that mode of survival. And that's a privilege that the last generation didn't have. So
No.
just to wrap up the question, wrap up what you asked, just simply give yourself permission to question without feeling guilt for it, because you're doing it, your intention is to create a better world for yourself and the next generation.
Yeah. Yeah, the generational trauma, we should, I suppose it's our role really to be able to filter that out, and to kind of take all the good while leaving the negative. And it's a really kind of powerful position to be in,
Yes.
parents of our generation. We have the luxury to worry about these things. But then again, the pressure is also quite intense to try and make sure that we find that balance and we actually do
Yeah.
it. We obviously hoping that things will get better over generations as time goes on. I mean, so looking at the future, what quite a personal question, I suppose, but what do you hope to see in families of color going forward in the future, kind of navigating the world and kind of learning in a culture that is still yet to fully embrace diversity?
I mean, from what I'm seeing, I truly believe that things are shifting. And I know, like, sometimes we can have conversations and it sounds really sort of doom and gloom and our culture is like this. But I truly believe, and I can speak as a millennial parent, that I think the shift is definitely happening. It
Yeah,
is happening, be it interracial marriages, be it, getting rid of colorism, be it, changing the way that we raise our children and, really just kind of putting the relationship first and, treating them love and just as human beings. I think ultimately, I think there's a real shift, and I believe that given the way that our children are raised and given the hopefully the cultural pride that we instill within them, things are going to change. Because now I look at the Gen Z kind of generation, because I do some work with the youth as well, so I look at Gen Z generation and I see them embracing their skin color, and I'm just like, wow. I see them embracing the texture of their hair, and I'm just like, wow, like you've
yeah,
managed to do that 10-20 years before us, which is only means that's evidence that the next generation are going to do it a heck of a lot earlier.
yeah.
So I think for the future, I would say I genuinely believe that our communities are going to embrace cultural diversity more and more, hopefully, and that we're going to go into the world, not building, going to go into the world, raising these children who are strong in their identity. And we're not saying it's going to be perfect. Like, of course, there's going to be struggles, and of course, right?
That's
That's
just part of
absolutely
life,
going
right? To
as
some
part of
degree,
life.
yeah.
It's absolutely going to exist, but I would like to hope that we build these loving homes and these safe spaces, so much so that when they do face those struggles, they have a safety net and they have somewhere to come and speak about these things. And even amongst each other as peers and stuff as well, and
Yeah.
as just adults and children in general. That is my hope, and I truly believe that because I can see it going forward.
That's beautiful. That is it's a wonderful note to end on. I think it's nice to that we can see a positive future. And even I myself can see a change happening even through Darcy and the women that I speak to fairly regularly, about skin color, about
Mm,
Eurocentric beauty ideals, about how, what once was a pin-up poster and something they really aspired to be like or look like is no longer the case. They're very much,
mm,
accepting of I am beautiful as I am, which is the honest truth, even though
yes.
we have been conditioned over many years to believe the opposite. So yeah, that's brilliant. I'd like to thank you very much for speaking with me today, Maryam. It's been a wonderful conversation. It could have gone on for much longer, but we are going to have to cut it short. And hopefully we'll speak again in the future.
Definitely. Thank you so much for having me. I've thoroughly, like, genuinely enjoyed this conversation. I'm sure we could have spoken for hours and hours, but yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye, Maryam.
Bye bye.